Well, good day, everyone. Welcome to the AURP webinar, Winning the War for Talent and Technology. My name is Brian Darmody. I'm the CEO of the Association of University Research Parks. We are a global nonprofit and represent research parks and communities of innovation sponsored by universities across the US, as well as businesses helping to build and manage these facilities. Note, attendees, you will be on mute and your camera's turned off, so we can't see you. We encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourselves to each other. And at the end of each panel, if we have time, we'll use the question and answer function for questions to the panelists. We'd like to welcome our colleagues from APLU Commission on Economic and Community Engagement, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, the National Organization for Research Development Professionals, and the Network of Academic and Corporate Relations Officers, all of whom helped in recruiting panelists and help market this webinar. We also want to thank Ripen for sponsoring this webinar. Ripen is a technology platform enabling opportunities for companies to create virtual internships and real-world challenges that can be embedded into coursework. David Savary from Ripen will speak to us at the conclusion of the first panel. Research Parks, Innovation Districts, University Career Centers, and Corporate Relations Offices have undergone tremendous transformation in the past decades, becoming important institutions to faculty, staff, students, alumni, parents, and university communities. We will discuss the role of University Career Centers during the first hour, focused on winning the war for talent. And in the second hour, discuss the role of University Research Development Offices and Corporate Relations Offices, the role they play in enhancing university industry relations for companies involved in university research and innovation districts in our local communities. So it's my great pleasure to turn this over to Leah Burton, Vice President for the Association of University Research Parks and Director of Office of Partnerships at NC State Centennial Campus in North Carolina. Leah.
Thank you, Brian. Well, as Brian stated, my name is Leah Burton, and I lead the NC State University Partnership Office. The work of my office is a hybrid of many of the activities that we'll be discussing today. We lead the recruitment and retention of corporations and government entities to our award-winning Centennial Campus, which some of you have probably visited. We're creating and we're growing collaborations with those partners. And we also serve as a centralized partnership function for NC State University, working to create partnerships with entities that may not be co-located on Centennial Campus. Those efforts span the full capabilities and expertise of NC State and also encompass the variety of engagement opportunities. So our work is indeed touching all of the functions that will be represented here today. And I'm excited about the expertise that we've brought together for each of these sessions. For the first session, we'll discuss career centers, and they've grown in importance to employers, to students and families, and they've made a big change since the days when I was in college looking through jobs in binders. They're important to families and also to our economic development entities. Research parks and innovation districts then are physical locations where students can find employment and employers can find talent. But what are some of the opportunities and pitfalls? We'll hear from three perspectives, and then we'll also be able to have a discussion, question and answer. So first up today is Sean Van Diersel. He's Executive Director of the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself and give us an overview of the work of NACE and how university career centers have changed over the years.
Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so pleased to be here with you today. As was indicated, I'm from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And Diana, if we can go to the next slide. Just to introduce myself, I am Sean Vanderzeel, the Executive Director of NACE, otherwise known as the National Association of Colleges and Employers. And I've been with NACE since March, so I started right during the pandemic. Prior to NACE, I was the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. And we've been just in the throes of everything with the pandemic. And I thought today, one of the things I could do with you is to share just some of the things that we've learned through this process. But meanwhile, feel free to connect with me. I hope that you will through LinkedIn, and also finding more about NACE through our website. Let me tell you a little bit on our next slide here about NACE. We are a community of professionals that is focused on the development and employment of college educated talent. So what we do is we provide for those individuals that are interested in the career development and employment with resources, tools, training, research, such as on job outlook, compensation, recruiting trends, and bring everyone together in online communities and through meetings, conferences, and connections. On the next slide, we'll take a look at our membership. We have about 13,000 members. Our members are made up from 3,000 different organizations. About 2,000 of those are colleges and universities, primarily from the college career centers, and they represent every kind of college and university across the nation. About 1,000 of our members are employers, and they're traditionally larger employers. The average size of the employers are around 20,000 employees. And we represent, of those employing organizations, those 3,000 organizations, 10,000 career service professionals and over 3,000 university relations talent acquisition professionals. So I thought what I do on the remainder of the slides is to provide a grounding for our conversation today, because a lot of people are really interested in where are we, how are things going with employment, and perhaps this will help to frame some of the conversation that we'll have today. So students who graduated in 2020 who had jobs lined up prior to graduation, had offers on the table, were ready to start, we found that about 7% of those offers were withdrawn or were rescinded. So that's a good news, bad news item, right? The bad news is 7% of students did have offers withdrawn. Good news is only 7% had offers withdrawn. We did find that about a third of employers, of those students who had jobs lined up, about a third of them had delayed start dates. Those delayed start dates were anywhere from about a month to 6 months, with an average right around the 3 to 4 month mark. Currently, well, I should say August, the unemployment rate for those that are in the college graduate age range, the traditional age range, that 20 to 24 age range, was about 13%. This compares to last year, same time August, of only 7%, so close to double. Those numbers did improve in the month of September, and that's traditionally how things work, and we're glad to see that the trend is continuing from previous years, that as the months go on, meaning from June through to September, that the unemployment rate among those individuals goes down. We're finding just in general, as you hear in the news, that those with bachelor's degrees certainly are much less impacted by our current economy than other groups in the world. So we also found that students who had internships that were lined up in May for the summer, about 20% of those were withdrawn. It was about 20 to 25% of those internship offers were withdrawn. So that was a really bad news item. For those that were continuing, we found that the majority of them, it was well over 46%. This particular survey was done concluded at the beginning of June. So we know this number went up even more dramatically after this. So over half of them went to fully virtual. But the big news item that really happened was that a good number of those internships were reduced in length. So those internships actually were anywhere from about 2 weeks to about 6 weeks in length, as opposed to the traditional 8 to 10 weeks that internships usually occur. Now, the reason that this is really important around internships is that we know that internships are a gateway to full-time employment. And so whenever internships are impacted, students aren't doing full-time internships, there could be a trickle effect down the line. So hopefully this provides you with just a grounding on where we are with employment. And as we talk through today's session, I'll be happy to answer any questions about this, as well as other trends that we're seeing in the marketplace.
Thank you, Sean. So next up then is Kelly Bishop. Kelly is director of the University of Maryland Career Center and the President's Promise. Kelly also ran the Michigan State Career Center, and both universities are AURP members, so I'm proud about that. Kelly, please give us an overview of your work running a career center within a university.
Great, thank you, Leah. Appreciate that. Delighted to be here today, especially speaking with my good colleagues, Sean and Christina. A little background on career centers, if you're not familiar with where they are now. Leah referenced earlier that they have become more important, and I would say this last decade, prior to the pandemic, career centers have been enjoying what many people have called a kind of a golden era, because they've become really part of the value proposition that universities put forward to their prospective students. On this first slide, I just want to give you a sense of what our mission actually is. And it's broader than most people think. They're familiar with the work we do around reviewing resumes and helping students prep for interviews, running job fairs, things involved with recruiting. But it's much more comprehensive in scope, and it really is around this notion of career readiness, which for career centers is defined by these 5 abilities. We want students to be able to navigate their career journey over a lifetime, and we're here to walk them through the first one in that transition into the world of work. I'd like to give you a sense on this next slide, another picture. This is contrasting with what Sean showed, but this is from our most recent graduation survey. So the class of 2019, which would include August and December 2018 grads, and then 2019 May grads. This is the job market they enjoyed. It's as good as we've ever seen outcomes. And Diana, if you would click a couple of times, we had a knowledge rate of 81%, which meant we were able to track down over 80% of our students, what their outcomes were. And adding together the full-time, part-time employment, continuing education, participating in a volunteer service program, serving the military, or starting a business, 95% of those students had landed in something. So these are great numbers, and we don't know what these numbers are going to look like when we close the books at the end of this year for the class of 2020. But we know from the current returns that they're certainly struggling in many ways. And as Sean referenced earlier, those that did not have substantial internship experience prior to graduation are really struggling the most. I want to show you in the next slide the way we conceive of the work that we're doing with students. It really spans across 3 key stages of development. The first one is just getting them to have a better sense of themselves, their interests, their values, their skills, what their motivations are, and getting them comfortable with using the tools and resources, understanding the process of going through these developmental stages. The really important one, though, is this experiential learning stage in the middle. This is where most of our emphasis has gone with new programming, because if you think about the real challenge for most students, it's, I'm not really sure I know that much about what's out there to be done. You know what perhaps your parents or relatives have done. There's what's on TV, which caused surges in applications to med school when ER was a popular show, applications to law school when LA Law was a hot show. In CSI, everybody wanted to be a forensic scientist. But that's not very accurate, and it certainly doesn't begin to give the depth of so many different fields that students don't know much about. So trying to help them get exposure and get experience which usually culminates in a formal internship, is in many ways the key to this whole model. And then that professional preparation are the things that you are familiar with, getting them ready to make that transition out, which includes all those recruitment stages, polishing their resume, their interview skills, but also helping them gain more professionalism in their approach. In terms of the services we offer, this next slide will just go through the list of the variety of things that we offer. So it's everything from one-on-one appointments and workshops. We do plenty of resume reviews and mock interviews. Those industry panels and networking events are part of that career exposure spectrum that we talked about. The career fairs and employer events run from formal fairs, which are really recruiting events, to things that are more of a softer sell, and just interactions, a chance to gain exposure. Again, we do run some career courses, and the ones that we run are fully online, asynchronous. We can put large volumes of students through these. We have over 1,000 students in the 3 courses we offer, and it's largely self-paced, but it does have the benefit of having them have to interact with our center, with the programs and resources, services that we have in order to complete their assignments, and that's really the impact that we're looking for. We started putting more modules available on our ELMS, our Canvas system, which is what the background system that runs most of our coursework, that allows faculty to put career assignments into their courses, just as a way for students to interact with this process more routinely, rather than just when they finally decide to either take a course of ours or come to the Career Center and start using things. We're seeing that's getting a lot more popular. We're going to put a lot more of those online. And then, of course, we offer 24/7 access to self-help modules and resources through our website. We count all of these interactions that students do, whether it's an appointment, whether it's an on-campus interview, coming to our career fairs, our workshops, what have you. And we had over 27,000 touch points last year. On the next slide, just to give you a sense, I mentioned before this middle stage of career exposure, career experience being so important. These are a couple of our signature programs that we're really proud of. One called Intern for a Day, which is a job shadow program. Over 800 students do this every year, and they actually would go on site and be with the employer that day. Most of those hosts are alums, and they're delighted to give their time over to students this way. Students call this a life-changing experience in many cases. We have, as you could imagine, pivoted this to a virtual mode for the current season, and it's going to be more of an informational interview. Also, with unfortunately, many of these employers are also stuck at home. They're not in their offices, but at least it's giving a piece of that exposure that we're looking for. Career shuttles are more of a group version of this, where we take a group of students on site and go visit an employer. And we have a very rich array of industries and fields represented here in the greater DC area. So this is one of the fun assets that we have by living where we live. In the next slide, I just want to put some thoughts out there before we get into Q&A about where we encourage employers, particularly employer partners, those that really want to engage deep with the university, to rethink the way that they interact with the campus for the purpose of hiring our talent. So at the base level, it's you show up and you recruit. And whether that means coming to career fairs or just posting jobs, actually coming into facilities to do interviews or doing those in whatever method you do. But to move above that to a higher stage of just early talent identification, which means you're going to engage in pre-recruiting sorts of things, not just information sessions, but really getting involved in some of the programmatic educational things that are going on campus, so that you begin to encourage students not just to be your applicants, but to help them gain some of the skills they'll need to be good applicants for you. At the highest expression of this, what you're really doing is growing talent. And growing talent means you're engaged. You could go ahead and move to the next slide. It means engaging in these kinds of activities. So as I mentioned, hosting job shadow and site visits. Again, it's mostly done by our alumni, but it can be a strategy for employers to say, let's have our alumni from your institution make themselves available for these, because that's good for exposing them to what we do and who we are. Being guest speakers, many student organizations have some sort of career development component, and are always looking for guest speakers that can address different topics of professional preparation. There are a lot of case competitions that happen on campus these days, sometimes sponsored by employers, and you can serve as judges on those, which is another way of doing that early talent identification. Something that's new and we're excited about, your employee resource groups may want to get involved with some of the affinity groups on campus. Again, this often can be done through your alumni networks in your company can become alumni networks for students on campus and give them more introduction, more sense of the whole person that's there working in your company. Alumni are often involved in advisory boards, in corporate advisory boards. You'll find these in certainly the pre-professional majors. That's another way to have some influence on what students are learning. And then hackathons are one of the key ways many employers, certainly looking for tech talent. Sponsoring a hackathon is an easy way to quickly spot talented students. So just some ideas for discussion. So I will sign off now and turn it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Kelly. In the past years, career intermediary firms have emerged to help support university career centers and businesses seeking to recruit university students. I'm pleased to introduce Christine Cruz Vergara, who is VP at Handshake, one of the largest firms in this space. Christine, it's over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'll quickly introduce myself, VP of Higher Education and Student Success at Handshake. But prior to my time at Handshake, I actually spent the past decade of my career in higher education. And as you can see from all the logos on your right, these are some of the institutions that I've had a pleasure of not only learning from, but also working at. And the main staple of my career was really change management through how we designed career education and how we integrated it into the fabric of an institution's experience. And my time at Handshake now has allowed me to help lead change in an even larger scale, to think about the entire sector as a whole, and to be able to partner with thousands of universities to have impact for millions of students. So as we go into the story today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Handshake for those of you that are not familiar with our company, and then I look forward to a lively discussion with Sean and with Kelly. So long before it was popular, Handshake's mission was to democratize opportunity for all students, regardless of where you went to school, what you majored in, or who your parents know. We understood that talent, while it is distributed evenly, unfortunately, opportunity is not. And on this next slide, let me tell you a little bit more about the founder story. So this picture that you see right here is a picture of a sign heading into Houghton, Michigan. And Kelly actually probably knows this well since he's lived in Michigan for a significant portion of his life. Houghton, Michigan is far north in the Upper Peninsula, and they receive about 300 inches of snow a year. And the reason this is important is because the co-founders of Handshake were students at Michigan Tech. And one of the things they noticed as students was that their school could not get employers to come and recruit at Michigan Tech. The reason being, it's difficult to get to. It's not in a major metropolitan area. They receive 300 inches of snow a year, right? And so these students, these incredibly talented students, wanted opportunities at some of the largest and most successful tech firms that are here in the Bay Area, that are in other parts of our country. But those employers were not readily available to them. They didn't have ways to be able to access them. And for the employers that are on the line right now, you know what recruiting used to look like. Each institution had a different system. You had to have a different login. You had to go into each one and repost all of your positions over and over and over and over again. And what the founders wanted to do was they wanted to create a way to democratize opportunity so that it wasn't so difficult for students to be able to get access to these jobs and internships, and it wasn't so difficult for employers to be able to find strong talent. And so Handshake was created as a network where employers can log into one system and they have access to all of the Handshake schools. And with a click of a button, they're able to actually post their position to multiple places and to be able to actually access institutions that they might not be able to physically travel to. And as you can imagine, in this particular year of COVID, that has proven to be even more important. And in a few slides, I'll actually talk to you about what that impact has had for underrepresented students, but this has been huge. So as we move forward to sort of the trajectory of what Handshake has looked like, you're going to see in this next graph that the growth has been steep. So we've been in existence for about 6 years, and we're very proud to say that we now partner with over 1,100 universities and colleges here in the States. We have over 6 million students actively using, and alumni actually, actively using the system. And because of this, you can actually go to the last slide here, we are able to build a really robust network. So we have over 1,100 schools, we have over 500,000 employers, and we're able to serve over 6 million students and alumni. And so what that has done is for every school that has joined Handshake, they've been able to see a 200 to 300% increase in their employer relationships and in the jobs and opportunities that they're able to provide to their students. I can say this is true even from my own experience. I brought Handshake to Wellesley more than 3 years ago, and we saw a 200% increase year over year for the first 2 years. For students, they're able to access more employers across the country and more opportunities in ways that are scalable and recommended towards their interests as well. And what we've seen over this past year with COVID, obviously everything has turned digital, everything has become virtual. And a virtual recruiting strategy is something that we actually saw trending for quite a bit with our employers before COVID happened. When the pandemic hit, all it did was simply accelerate what typically probably would have taken 2 to 3 years for employers to really build out digital recruiting strategies. It condensed it down to 2 to 3 months. And what we're hearing consistently from our 500,000 employers is that the majority, 76%, have actually spent time adding in digital recruiting capacity and training for their teams to make this pivot. And they expect to continue doing a significant amount of digital recruiting as they move forward. And part of the reason why is because of access. So we are seeing through our data that you are getting 2 times more Black students and Latinx students participating in virtual events, and 1.5 times more female technologists participating in virtual events just in this past year. And I'll be interested to see how those trends continue on even as we eventually resolve the pandemic and we're able to reconvene in new ways. But this is a little snapshot of what we've been able to do so far, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. So with that, I'll turn it back over to the panel so we can have our discussion.
Thank you, Christine and Kelly and Sean, for your presentations. I want to thank you for the insight that you brought already to our discussion. So I have a couple of questions already queued up. There's one that was inserted in our Q&A portal that was answered by Sean, but I want to also offer it up to our other 2 panelists. Do you have data or a source of the information for students with internships who tend to get more full-time offers? And I think, in specific, Laura Blau from University of Illinois was asking that of Sean, but I want to also open that up to our other 2 panelists. What do you know about the tie to internships resulting in full-time offers and also higher starting salaries?
How about I start just giving that background? So basically the survey data shows that a student who has a paid internship will receive 50% more job offers than those that either never intern or have an unpaid internship. And oftentimes I'm then asked, because I'm lumping unpaid and never interns in the same category, that's not to say that there isn't value in having an unpaid internship. So I just want to be really clear about that. There are different reasons that certain students do have go to unpaid internships, and they certainly do have value. But in terms of the translation to full-time jobs, that's the trend line that we tend to see. I'd like to just layer on one more thing with that. Because Christine brought up a really good point just around equity with students. And the other thing that we find is that Black students, for instance, as well as Hispanic students, multiracial students, are underrepresented as a proportion of paid interns.
Yeah.
So what that means then, let's piece both of these pieces together, since they're underrepresented as a proportion of paid interns, they are less likely to have a job offer upon graduation. They're not going to have the advantage of those 50% more job offers. And I'd also like to layer on just one more tidbit of information, which is that we find that paid interns, those that had paid internship experience, receive in their first full-time job $10,000 more in compensation than those that either never interned or were unpaid interns. So you can see there's a trickle effect in that advantage of paid internships, and it actually provides a disadvantage for those students who are either Black or Hispanic, multiracial. And so this is certainly something that we all hopefully are working towards together, and particularly a role that our career centers will be able to engage in with their students on their campuses to provide those advantages.
Other input, Christine or Kelly?
I think it was well said.
Yeah, definitely. We have, of course, data just around Maryland students that would bear out the same things that Sean said. One of the interesting things, though, to think about the distinction between the paid internships and the unpaid is often you'll find the paid internships are a recruitment tool for employers. They are hiring talent through that pipeline. The unpaid ones, half the time, are saying, well, I'm just willing to offer something if a student wants exposure, but they're not necessarily seeing the internship pool as their talent pipeline. So there's more investment being made. I think the real challenge with those, however, is the stakes are very high. They tend to recruit or ID that group even as freshmen in some cases, as sophomores. And if you're not ready right out of the gate to compete for those internships, it may be lost to you forever. So it's absolutely a gap that we need to close, and something that is part of our new diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives.
Can I ask then another follow-up question? What does the data say about minority students? Are they not applying for these internship positions, or are they not selected?
Actually, do you mind
Or
if
both,
I can actually, I'll jump in with actually some interesting research that we've recently done around some common hiring practices that disadvantage Black and Latinx students. And we actually have a new one coming out soon for females, for women students. There are a couple common practices that we often think of as really normal, and we don't realize that it actually disadvantages the funnel. So one of them is actually using GPA as a cutoff. So for some of these internships and for some of these full-time opportunities, there's usually a 3.5 GPA cutoff. When you do that, you are unintentionally actually keeping out 2x the number of Black students. Okay, so that's actually pretty significant. And just by widening your range, widening your GPA range, you can include more of your underrepresented students, or you can just eliminate your GPA as a qualifier, because we actually know from other research for years now that GPA is not actually a good predictor of whether or not you're going to do well in your position, right? It just is an easy number to be able to use as something to sift the number of applicants that you have, but it's actually not a good indicator. So GPA in and of itself is not necessarily something that you need to use. It's just something that people are used to using. So that's one piece. And to keep in mind, part of why this is we live in a system that has disadvantaged the Black community for a long time. And so when you think about that, there are financial repercussions, there are educational repercussions, right? And so grades are also not always a good reflection of truly the quality and the talent of what you are looking for as well. So that's one component. The second component is really tight recruiting timelines. Some of these internships that we're talking about and jobs that we're talking about recruit within essentially a 6-week window in the fall. And that again disadvantages underrepresented students, particularly Black and Latinx students, many of whom have other obligations to either work part-time to be able to support themselves or to be able to support their families. And when you have other obligations outside of just going to class and extracurriculars, you might not have the time to be able to put together a package that's going to truly showcase your best self. And as a student, you might not have the confidence then to want to submit as many applications during that time period. So companies that have actually chosen to extend their recruiting block and their timeline to be more kind of always recruiting have actually seen, again, an increase in the number of students that are in the top of funnel so that they can have a more representative applicant pool. And then the third thing is transparency around salary and relocation. So companies that are more transparent about what their salary range is actually increase the number of Black and Latinx students that will apply by 13%. So that is huge. Being able to explain what that looks like, again, helps to democratize information. A lot of underrepresented students don't come from families or from communities that have this inside knowledge of what that's going to look like. And they have some very practical things that they have to be able to do, like pay back their loans, or pay their bills, or support their families, or help their siblings, right? So something like pay is an important factor for them as they're thinking about where they might want to work. And so the more transparent you can be about that, the more helpful that can be. Relocation actually happens to also be a really great benefit to also highlight transparently. That can actually increase the number of Black candidates you have by over 30% if you have relocation expenses that you're willing to offer for candidates as well. And again, this is both internship as well as for full-time.
I would just add, I think that that was great information. Thank you so much, Christine, for that. And I would just layer on to the issue that what we find is that employers are saying that students, there's a gap between the higher education system and employment, and the needs and the skills and the competencies that they believe that employees need to have. And what we're finding is that employers are using that GPA as a screening tool and a first screening tool. About 3/4 of employers, when we survey them, say they're still using the GPA, which is probably not a great indicator of competency or skill before they even get to the competency or skill to find out if a student has the competency or skill. And so by using that disqualifier, they may not be getting to those employees at all that they're trying to achieve to. So that's why I love what Kelly was saying earlier around the competency work that they're doing and that integration across the campus system and helping students to be able to articulate what their actual skills and competencies are for employers.
Can we build upon that a little bit? Because I think that this is a topic that is really important to all of our universities. And so, I mean, we've pointed to a number of things that companies can be doing differently. Kelly, you hit a little bit on the things that you're doing, but what, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what things are you seeing that universities are employing to great effect, and what things would you like to see? What are universities not doing when it comes to the ways that we can assist our students to be more visible for these positions?
Start, and I know that Christine and Sean can add to this, but picking up on what Christine mentioned before, I talked about the importance of career exposure. The program that I worked with at my previous institution, Michigan State, the College Assistance Migrant Program, was an excellent program. It brought students that came from migrant families, largely from the South, to complete the degree at Michigan State. And we worked with them. One of the things we learned is that most of them were deciding to major in social work. And we asked, why? And what we're told is because that's the professional they've met and know something about. And it sort of reinforced to me, you know, if you haven't been exposed to this, you don't even know what's out there waiting for you. We had many very large ag product companies that were saying, I would love to get the talent some of those students represent, just their grit, their fluency in another language. But students didn't know about those jobs, you know, from where their families had come from. So it's a really critical piece. The things that we do spend a lot of time doing to help with that with underrepresented students, there are many support programs on campus that focus on different student populations. And so we do programming by request of those support units that often does bring employers in to meet with them and talk about these professional preparation, these what do you do in your job all day? Why did you wind up there? if we can get an alum from that program to come back and say, this is my journey, this is how it worked for me, that is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And without that, I think these short windows that Christine talked about, these old practices that I think that the GPA cutoff is nothing more than a way to make a pile smaller. There's no legitimacy about it. It's just, I need some way of having only 50 resumes to look at. So I think I'll just throw a GPA requirement on it and cut it down. And that in many ways is having the opposite impact that they really wanted if they want to diversify their candidate.
Mm-hmm. I would say, you know, across the thousands of institutions that I have the privilege of working with, there are a few commonalities in what I'm starting to see more people do, which is really heartening. And there's some things that I think people are still gravitating towards that I think will not necessarily address some of the DEI aspects that you mentioned. So one thing that I think is not always helpful is just focusing on specific programs. There's nothing wrong with programming. However, recognize that programming is only typically going to hit a small percentage of the students that you are trying to reach. So programming alone is not enough. You also have to look at other systems or structures that your career center either functions as or within to be able to change up what you're doing. So one aspect is thinking about how do you actually scale what it is you do, so that instead of thinking about, I'm going to give really amazing service to the 30% of students that happen to walk in my doors and that happen to find me and meet my staff, you have to think about, my new goal is how do I actually reach 100% of students? And that's fundamentally going to change how you approach your work. It's going to fundamentally change the types of structures that you create, because you have to be able to scale what it is you're doing. And then you can have some of the more personalized one-on-one as ancillary after you do that. So let's actually just take, I used to be at University of Maryland, so actually let's just take University of Maryland. They have over 25,000 students. Kelly's team can't actually meet one-on-one with all 25,000 students. It's not possible. He doesn't have enough people. There are not enough hours in the day, right? And the other reality is all 25,000 students don't need the same kind of help. They don't all need the same depth of handholding. So if Kelly flips all of that on its head, essentially, and says, I'm going to deploy this technology or this structure, or I'm going to embed in the academic experience in these ways, I'm actually going to be able to reach the masses, right? I'll be able to reach 80 to 100% of my students that way. And some of them don't need anything more than to be pointed to the right resource, and they're going to be able to go forward. And then it allows Kelly to actually look at his data. So this would be my second point that people are doing well, they're starting to, which is actually sifting the data. Look at the data and see, who are you reaching currently? Who are you not reaching? Who's falling through the cracks? And are they not coming because they don't need you? That may be fine. You just need to point them to a resource. Or are they not coming because they don't know about you? They're scared. They don't feel comfortable talking to you or your team, right? Those are different issues that you have to solve for, but you don't know until you actually sift it by data. I also think the last piece is you actually have to put metrics on DEI if you want something to change. And so again, you have to look at, just like companies are starting to look at, what does their leadership look like? What does the makeup of their company look like? I think institutions also have to do something similar. So when you're looking at outcomes, which every institution and senior leader typically wants to know, are you also splitting that data by demographic? Are the outcomes comparable across your white students as they are your Black students or your brown students? When you take a step back, that's a lagging indicator, of course. When you're looking at leading indicators, there is literally one action that every student has to take in order to achieve a positive outcome, and that is to apply. They have to actually pull the trigger and apply for a job. And that is not always a metric that many career centers actually track. Track your applicants, track it year to year, track it across your different demographics, and see what that's looking like, because that gives you information on whether or not you're actually missing a particular group, and you need to have more intervention for one group versus another and in a different way, so that you can actually help them to take the action that needs to happen. And I'm not saying that there aren't plenty of other actions that lead up to the application point, but that is literally the action right before you can actually achieve a positive outcome. So those are some of the things that I think we're seeing kind of in aggregate.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Let me queue up another question here from Laura Frericks. She has heard recently some NACE research about increase in 1-year and 5-year retention rates of full-time employees that previously had internships with the company. So can you talk more about that research?
Laura, unfortunately, I don't have that right in front of me, so I don't know the statistics that are involved, but certainly there is a lot of data available that points to, that really points to retention rates and the value of the internship experience over time, and particularly retention rates within a company that a particular student has interned in and then gained full-time employment, and the longevity of that particular individual long-term. And so there is a lot of data pointing towards those increased retention rates based upon those various populations. And so it is in many employers' best interests to continue with their internship programs, because they generally are seeing higher retention rates among those that they make offers to and then actually accept them.
Thanks, Sean. So another question for the group here. I'm interested in the trends that you're seeing within your spheres that have to do with expectations of career centers. From the university perspective, yes, but also including students and parents. And from the business perspective, what are those changes in expectation that you're seeing, and how are you meeting those?
Kelly, you should start us off.
I was hoping, Christine,
Get us going,
you
Kelly.
nailed that, because you are so good at these sound bites. Well, I was going to mention when Christine, Christine's is totally right. And we've had many conversations about flipping the model on its head. And she's absolutely one of the leading speakers on this topic in our field. So, you know, when the president wants to know how we're doing, the question is about, what about the students that didn't get the outcome we wanted? You know, I just showed you our stats, although it's really old school and we don't usually say it out loud, but it's still called placement rate because that's what the president thinks it is. But a 95% placement rate is sort of, if you think about it, it's sort of the minimally acceptable rate, right? Because you're saying that if you come here and get a degree, and then, you know, as we know, if you'll plug into the resources and get engaged, you ought to have a positive outcome for that. The stat I didn't show you is we also ask students that report employment as their outcome, how related is this job to either your primary career goal or a stepping stone toward that primary career goal. And 94% of the students in that last survey indicated that. So there is alignment there. So I think that's sort of an expectation. And as Christine said, if all of us in these career centers don't flip the model and say, how do I take care of the students that aren't going to naturally start this process, that may be intimidated to come in because I don't know what my career goals are yet, so I can't come talk to you, when in fact, that's exactly what we're here for. If we don't concentrate on that, then we're not going to see outcomes that are needed. There are many students that frankly don't need us. And often the ones that use us the most are the ones that probably need us the least. You can always tell they come in during the first few weeks of freshman year and they're like, I know I'm behind, but I've got like 17 things I want to get done before the semester's over. And these are my career goals, and what do I do? And automatically we all say, you're going to be fine. The ones that don't know to do that. And I was one of those. Christina's heard this story a lot, but I've spent my whole career trying to correct the mistake I made as a student, that you could fail at this by graduation because you never plugged in. You didn't know to plug in. So I think that's the expectation. Now, what happens in this pandemic world is hard to state. I mean, right now we're just patting ourselves on the back that we're still open. We're still open. And if we can hold that, that will be an accomplishment. I do know that I just fielded this morning something from a disgruntled graduate student that had gone to some of our virtual career fairs last week and said, you know, everybody I talked to, no one's hiring. Like they just wanted to kind of pitch themselves, but they're not hiring. I need a job. What's going on? And I think we're going to have to deal with that we'd rather have employers here than not. But many of them will be saying right now, I have no idea if I can hire anybody in the next 5 or 6 months. And I'd love to hear, Christine, what you're seeing from your side of the table, and maybe Sean, if you're hearing this voice from the big employers in NACE.
Yeah, for sure. So on our end, we're seeing a few trends. So from employers, we're really seeing an expectation around a role shift with career services and their relationship with career services. So particularly in a virtual world, there's so much more that an employer can actually do that they used to rely on the institution to be able to help do for them, right? So let's actually just take events. That's probably the easiest bucket for us to kind of talk about in a really concrete way to bring this to life. In the past, an employer would have to call you, Kelly, or your team to be able to set up an event, to be able to get space on your campus, to be able to choose the right date so that you're going to be able to help encourage the right students to attend, right? All of that has to essentially be orchestrated by your team. And you have a whole team of employer relations people who spend a significant amount of their time trying to coordinate and organize all these things. Or they put together panels of multiple employers or networking events or so on and so forth, many of the things that you talked about. Well, in a virtual world, it becomes significantly easier for an employer to actually do that on their own, right? Apple, Google, whomever, we could choose any employer and they could essentially decide, I'm going to host a Q&A, I'm going to host a panel, I'm going to host an AMA, and I'm going to make it available to students across multiple schools. So Kelly, I'm going to give you the link and I'm going to reach out to Sue over here and give her the link, and I'm going to give Norma a link, and so on and so forth. And I just need you to help me get students to this. Well, in some ways, that's fantastic for universities because now Kelly has just saved his team significant amounts of time. They don't have to reinvent the wheel and try and recreate all these events. What they need to do is what I sort of have classified. They need to become the most effective channel marketers possible for these employers. Presumably, as a career center at an institution, you should know your student population super, super well. So that when an employer comes to you and says, I'm really interested in trying to fill X, Y, and Z role. This is sort of the candidate profile of what I'm looking for, the skill sets, the personality, the kind of characteristics I'm going to need for someone to be successful here. They got to be gritty. They have to persevere, X, Y, and Z. Kelly, who should I go to? How do I target? And Kelly and his team should be able to help do some really fine-tuned targeting and essentially channel marketing to be able to get those students and say, oh, I know students that come out of this class tend to have a lot of those qualities. Students who are in this student organization or of this year tend to have certain experiences that I think this employer is really gonna like. So I'm gonna target those students and I'm gonna help get them to those events. So that's what I mean when I say kind of switching employer relations a bit to more channel marketing and building out that skill set, I think is going to be really valuable because we're seeing employers who want that. They don't want to lose their relationships with the universities, but they do need those relationships to shift a bit. They don't want universities to necessarily be the gatekeeper of the events anymore. So that's one piece. Another trend that we're seeing on the student end, I'll just give you one major one. This is actually not just to the Career Center, but this is also to employers. So students are actually not afraid of this adaptation to virtual and sort of what might come of COVID, right? They might feel a little overwhelmed. They've certainly had a lot to take in and to adapt to, but based on a survey that we did later this summer, we actually saw that 40% of students said that their virtual internship experience was actually about what they expected. And 40% additional said it was easier than what they expected. Okay, so now you have over 80% of students that are essentially like, yeah, cool, that was not so bad, right? But what they still would like is more of a focus on connection and well-being. So that hasn't been lost in this conversation. And I think one of the things that they look to the Career Center to help with is how do I still build some of those personal relationships? Happy to do it virtually, but can you give me tips and can you help me to actually connect to this? And I'm gonna actually call Kelly out for something he said to me, gosh, I think this was like 5 years ago now, but he said, we actually should serve as agents. Think of us as like talent agents, right? If you think about it from like an entertainment sort of industry perspective, we have the responsibility to actually have those relationships with different employers and different alumni and different people so that we can actually literally help connect a student to those people, not just tell them how to do it, but literally help connect them and facilitate that. And for underrepresented students, that's super important to help build some of that social capital. And then on the employer side, when it comes to well-being and connection, students really have some expectations that employers are going to include well-being and mental health as part of the benefits package. They want to see employers care about that. They want to see them talk about that. They're not afraid of the change, but they do want to see that they're also going to be cared for as employees. So over 50% of our students are saying that they would like to see that as part of their benefits package as they explore different opportunities. So those are some of the trends we're seeing with students and parents and employers.
And I would just add on, I think, Kelly, you were getting at also what is kind of the job outlook looking like. And I'd be happy to just touch on that real quick. I know Christine probably has info on that too. Might be a nice way to close out here. We're just, so this is, we haven't published yet, but we're getting ready to our job outlook. And what we found in our survey of employers is that hiring overall, at least now, this may change over the coming months, remember, is only going to be projected to be down slightly. I mean, when I say slightly, less than 1%. However, there are some really big caveats to that. Down from a year ago, big caveats. A third of those employers who were surveyed are going to cut back their hiring back to levels where the last recession was. So back to 2008, 2009 levels. Over a third. So really the flatness is being driven by certain industries who are doing really well in this economy. And that, you know, that is the telecommunications, that is software engineering, that is food and beverage manufacturing. And those industries, because they are actually growing and they are hiring, it's making the numbers look better than they may actually be for certain categories of students who will be graduating. So for me, when I think about students coming up here upon graduation, it's about helping them to think about their skills, think about their competencies, and being able to leverage them for the job market that they're going to be entering. They may not be able to find the job in the exact industry that they had hoped that they would upon graduation, or perhaps in the kind of job that they had foreseen themselves getting. However, there will be jobs available. They're going to have to probably be a little creative about what those jobs are that they land, if the predictions stay where they are now.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. All right. Well, gosh, I'm pretty sure that we could continue this for another hour. And I'm sorry, there was another question in the queue that we didn't quite get to, but I want to encourage anybody who didn't have a chance to ask a question of these three professionals to contact them through LinkedIn, you know, connect in that way. And I know that they'll be responsive to your ongoing questions. So now I'd like to introduce Dave Savory, co-founder and also director of experiential learning at Ripen, which has sponsored this webinar. I got to know Dave earlier this summer and I've been impressed with his product. And so I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Leah, and thanks, Brian, for including us in this event. Good to be here, everyone. My name is Dave Savory. I'm the co-founder and director of experiential learning at Ripen. For those who are a little unfamiliar with Ripen, we are an experiential learning, project-based experiential learning platform that really focuses on creating micro project-based experiences for students by connecting primarily educators and academic partners with industry partners to embed real-world projects into the curriculum. We're active on about 220 campuses globally right now, have a network of about 3,000 professors, and have we're a two-sided system, so we also have about 10,000 industry partners of all shapes and sizes who are posting very specific projects that are designed to align with the learning objectives of the curriculum that professors can embed into their programs, into their classes, so students get that opportunity to apply their learning and build some of the skills that we've been talking about and connections with industry partners. If anyone's interested in learning more, I'd be happy to connect with you offline to have a discussion. Thanks, Leah.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to move now to our next session. And great, thank you for putting all three of those up. So besides gaining access to student and faculty talent, corporations often locate on research parks or in innovation districts to be near new technologies spun out of universities or to set up their own R&D centers. Establishing corporate research centers and research parks often requires working not just with the research park, but also with the university's vice president for research office or the vice president for corporate relations on topics such as sponsored research agreements, overhead, intellectual property ownership, and a myriad of other issues. So these are just some of the complexities in creating these types of long-term research relationships with corporations. First up today to discuss the role of university research offices is Jill Jividen. Jill is Director of Research Development at the University of Michigan and Vice President of the National Organization of Research Development Professionals, one of our co-sponsors for this event. Jill, can you give us a presentation of your role at Michigan and also with Nordup?
Yes, thank you, Leah. Thank you for inviting Nordup to participate in this panel. I am actually a last-minute substitute. Our president was supposed to come, Kimberly Eck, and she actually is moving across states this week. She took a job at Emory University. She's moving from UT Knoxville. So she's had a very busy week, and then she had a conflict this afternoon. So thank you for having us. And I threw these slides together at the very last minute. And I will talk to you about what is Nordup, what is research development, what this looks like at the University of Michigan, and how you can engage with research development professionals toward facilitating research and collaborations. So what research development is, it's not research administration, it's not development, it is some combination. It overlaps with those things, but it's its own entity. It's a growing field. We think of it as strategic, catalytic, capacity building. These are all the words we sort of associate with what we do. And people who do research development are jacks of all trades. My PhD is actually in English, and I've made my career out of teaching scientists how to be better writers. So many of us are science, we work in science advocacy, science communication, working on helping faculty become more competitive and going after grant funding. We're working on how to help teams work better together. We're helping our institutions be more strategic about going after big grant funding, helping teams plan strategically to thank you. Yes, let's hear it for the humanities. You know, really trying to help our researchers and our institution be successful in these areas. If I could have the next slide, please. So these are the kind of the areas we work in: strategic research advancement, communication and of research and research opportunities, enhancement of collaboration and team science. You'll hear a lot of us working on things like ideas labs and grand challenges at our institutions. So we can work on a very macro level at the institutional level, but also working on the micro level where we really get into the teams and we do project management and proposal development and ideation. Those of us that have strong writing and editing backgrounds sometimes are writing parts of the proposals depending on what the expertise is. And really, it's so varied. And I'm really, because this is an alternative career for me, I'm really grateful to have found something that is challenging and rewarding. And I never know what's going to be in my inbox from day to day. So that's always really exciting to constantly have new opportunities and new challenges. Next slide, please. So Nordup is the National Organization of Research Development Professionals, and we would consider our peer institutions organizations like NCURA and SRAI, which are research administration organizations, but we differentiate ourselves from research administration in the fact that our research administrator colleagues are often working on application forms and budgets and contracts, data use agreements, and compliance issues, IRB review, and things like that. We refer to those things as pre-award and post-award activities, right? Referring to grant awards. And what we do on the research development side, we often refer to as pre-award. So we're into skill building and helping faculty develop career plans and what they should be applying for when, and connecting them to resources and to collaborators and funding opportunities, and helping establish partnerships and that sort of thing. So NORDP, through a grassroots network, established itself as an organization, and it's young compared to our peer organizations, only about 10 years old. We are 1,000 members strong just within the last year, around 400 institutions, more than a dozen countries. It's growing internationally. It is a member-driven and volunteer-led organization. It's all volunteer-led. We work with an association management firm to do some of our administrative stuff. But we're working on strengthening the profession, really growing research development as a field unto itself. We're working on facilitating research collaborations and team science, as I mentioned, advancing knowledge creation and discovery, fostering excellence in research and creative activities. We have a robust peer network, a listserv, mentoring programs, professional development opportunities, webinars. We're just launching our Research Development 101 class for people that are just getting started in the field. We have a fantastic annual conference, and it just sold out for the first time in 2019. I think it was around 600 members attended that one, and we were planning for a sellout conference in 2020. So we really have a lot of interest, growing interest, and not just from the staff that are the practitioners of research development on what I call that micro level, working with researchers themselves, but a lot more interest from the leadership, senior administrators from our institutions, like vice presidents for research, vice chancellors, research associate deans and folks like that, who are really thinking about how they can advance their missions, their units strategically in the funding space, and helping their researchers be successful. So I think one of the reasons, or one of the ways we fit in with this audience here, is that we are a diverse group. As I said, we are jacks of all trades, and so we have people within research development who within their institutions are doing corporate relations, are doing foundation relations, are doing science communication, and but especially our colleagues that come from smaller institutions. University of Michigan, as I'll talk about, is a vast university, and we have units that handle all of those things. But colleagues of ours at smaller institutions are often doing all of these things, right? Are even more jacks of all trades. And so you may have just a couple of staff who are doing all of it: the corporate engagement, the communication, foundation relations, government relations, all of that stuff. If I could have the next slide, please. I'll talk a bit about what I do specifically at the University of Michigan, and I've been there 10 years now. I spent 5 of those years in the medical school, and I was the assistant director for research development there. And my work really started to go to grow beyond the medical school, where I'm providing services and guidelines and advice and strategy to units beyond, so across campus. And last year, I was able to finally convince our central office that they in fact needed to have someone centrally who was able to sort of harness all of these efforts that were happening around campus. We have 19 schools and colleges, and about half of them had research development people working in them. And so we really needed to provide those kinds of services centrally, so that the units that did not have as many resources as some of our bigger schools could take advantage of those kinds of resources and services and support. So my mission, as I'm setting up shop in our vice president's office, is to increase faculty competitiveness and institutional strategy for obtaining research funding, especially large scale, like funding for centers and institutes. So I am, helping on large scale efforts, doing lots of workshops and webinars around grant writing. We are working on doing facilitations for team science and strategy, and here enhancing communication and collaboration across schools, colleges, and units, because I think that's how it fits into your audience here. Those of you that have research development professionals or similar professionals within your institutions can work with them to help build these collaborations. The industry engagement piece of this, especially that you're working on, have us come in. You know, I have worked with my corporate and foundation relations teams on doing workshops to help our researchers learn how to make better elevator pitches, right? How to communicate with people who are not subject matter experts and really sell their ideas and make them compelling. We're also, going in and doing facilitations that help teams become more cohesive and plan in strategic ways to go after the funding that they want to get and make sure that they have a shared vision. If you go to the next slide, please. I know there was some interest when I talked to Brian yesterday. There was some interest in what we do on the industry engagement side. I have colleagues, so we have units that handle this, and I would point you to our Office of Tech Transfer, which just released their fiscal year 20 annual report. There are some stats for you, and within that office, we have the Business Engagement Center. And so they do a lot of work on the industry engagement side as well. And I will wrap up there and wait for questions.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Jill. Next up is Amy Skehan, and Amy is Assistant Vice Chancellor for Foundation and Corporate Engagement at UC Davis. Amy, I'm interested for you to give us an overview of what you do at UC Davis. And you're muted still.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Sure can. Yep.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you. Again, my name is Amy Skehan, and I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Foundation and Corporate Engagement at UC Davis. I've been in my role just over a year and was recruited to implement a new foundation and corporate engagement model for our entire campus. I've been working in corporate relations for more than 25 years. Prior to UC Davis, I served as the Strategic External Partnerships and Government Contracts Lead, as well as a university program supervisor for the External Alliances team at Ford Motor Company. There I was responsible for our most strategic university partnership, along with serving as the company's global domain lead for our university engagement in the mobility and autonomous vehicle space. Pertinent to this conversation, in my role at Ford, I oversaw our partnership with U of M, University of Michigan, hello Jill, and the construction of a new robotics building at the addition of a fourth floor of that building that would be leased entirely to Ford. And then prior to Ford, I was at the University of Michigan on the Dearborn campus and launched that campus's Business Engagement Center, working very closely with the Business Engagement Center in Ann Arbor, and to develop a coordinated engagement model for the entire campus. So the next slide here. This is just a quick snapshot of our campus. Oh, slide, go back one more slide there, sorry. This is just a quick snapshot of UC Davis. We are an R1 research and grant university and one of 10 campuses on the UC system. We have the third largest enrollment behind UCLA and Berkeley, with close to about 40,000 students. We have 4 colleges and 7 graduate and professional schools. We have about 102 undergraduate majors and 101 graduate programs. We are most known for veterinary medicine and our agriculture programs that are both ranked #1 in the nation, but have many other programs that are in the top 10, particularly on the medical side. And pertinent to this conversation, construction for Aggie Square's first phase is scheduled next year. This is our new launched initiative, which is a public-private partnership for a new innovation district on our Sacramento campus, which is part of our medical campus. Again, we'll be starting construction soon. This will include 2 life science buildings, a modern lab space, classroom and office tower, housing and food and health building, and an open air marketplace and public retail square. And it will be, our first phase will be about 8 acres. Next slide. As I stated, I came to UC Davis around a year and a half ago to launch our new campus coordinated collaboration model. Under the direction of the Chancellor and our development leadership, this new approach for relationship management focuses more on collaboration and communication to foster meaningful engagement with our corporate and foundation partners. Our new team combines the Office of Foundation and Corporate Giving, which was in development, with the Corporate Relations Office that was in the Office of Research. And over the last year, our team has grown from about 4 to 13, with an additional 6 colleagues in the unit who serve as points of contact for our largest and most comprehensive partnerships. And then we're also going to be expanding to include colleagues on the medical side within this next year. Next slide, please. Overall, our office serves as the campus-wide kind of front door or pathway to university resources and talent for industry and foundation engagement. Internally, our team works with more than 15 offices around campus, including the Office of Research, our Career Service and Internship Office, our Licensing and Technology and Startup offices, as well as all the schools and colleges and units, both on the academic and the medical campus. So our team leads the coordination of engagement. We share information and assist faculty and staff on strategies for expanding and elevating effective and efficient foundation and corporate engagement. In all, we have about 315 companies and foundations in our portfolio. We have new metrics as our team is not measured on funding in either philanthropy or in research, but really about looking at finding the win-win for our overall engagement. And what I want to highlight, I think that is most about our team, is that we are not focused in a particular area of engagement again, but instead working closely with our partners. As such, our team is trained in relationship management and have a deep understanding of the two cultures that we bridge.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate those remarks. And we've been watching with admiration and interest the work that Mark Robney is doing at Aggie Square. So congratulations already on that. Our next presenter then is Kim Jacobs. Kim is co-president of NACRO, and she's also director of engineering extension at the University of Florida. I'm going to turn it over to you now, Kim.
Great. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in this discussion today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Really quickly, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about NACRO, and so if we can advance to the next slide. As was mentioned, I'm currently the co-president of the Network of Academic Corporate Relations Officers, and so NACRO is one of those organizations that, much like NORDP, seeks to provide professional development opportunities for corporate relations officers at academic institutions. We are slightly older than NORDP is. I believe we're celebrating our 12th year this year. And we've grown since that time, where we initially focused on providing a place for the corporate relations officers at the 115 R1 institutions to get together and talk about the work that we did. We've now expanded and now represent over 650 different individuals working in a variety of different academic institutions, but all with a common thread of being in the area that intersects the industry and university communities. And the professional development opportunities that we put forward for our members largely focus on those who are coming into the field, but who are also trying to figure out how to navigate this place between maybe the philanthropic side of things or being more in the research development side of things. And how do we begin to develop the competencies and the ability to develop relationships with our industry partners so that we can advance the purposes of our academic institutions. So most of the individuals that we serve in that organization come to the organization and to the profession with a natural born sense of being connectors. We want to help people connect with the various entities within our respective institutions because we want to see the true potential realized by facilitating those relationships and those connections. Professional developments here are really focused on the holistic engagement that happens when we work collaboratively with all aspects of our academic institutions. Our Career Connections Center here at the University of Florida, the research development team in our UF Innovate office, working with our incubator spaces that are also run out of our innovation office. All of those things are part and parcel of how we're going to be able to effectively work with industry. And NACRO really helps to try and provide a grounding and a baseline of professional development for people who are entering this profession and trying to navigate an academic institution, the various components of that institution, and learning how to work with one another. And so if we can go to the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the University of Florida. I do have to brag on the institution that I'm at. And I think that some of the things that I learned as I was preparing for the session was I reached out naturally to our AURP representatives from UF. And, you know, I've always known that Mark Long and team in the UF Innovate office ran a great program, but I always like to brag on them because I think part of why we've been so wildly successful with our incubator spaces and having them at capacity is because we really do try to forge a lot of relationships between that office and offices similar to mine in the College of Engineering. There's a version of me in our ag school, one in the med school, in a variety of the different academic homes that we have here at the University of Florida. And part of why I think we've been so successful is because the team at the UF Innovate and the incubation spaces and our version of the university or university research parks, we work very closely and collaboratively with one another. Despite kind of the downturn in a number of different things, we've remained at 100% capacity in our incubator space. We continue to see huge success rates for the companies that are going into those spaces. And so it's been a real pleasure to work and collaborate with the team there to see things flourish and to see it come to fruition. And so those are just a handful of highlights that I think showcase what we do here at the University of Florida. But I think more importantly, and the next slide, if we could, more importantly, I think the thing that UF successes highlight is the nature of how effective collaboration can yield results. And so when I think about what are some of the best practices that NACRO helped inform as I was developing professionally, it was that relationships matter, not only with the industry partners that we try to work with and that we're trying to be a resource for, but how do we do that with our colleagues? How do we reach across the aisle? How do I understand what the motivations are for my colleagues in the University Research Park? How do I understand what the motivations are for my friends that are in the advancement team or in the research development side of things? I think when we have relationships, not just with the industry clients that we serve, but with our very own stakeholders that maybe are in organizationally different parts of the university community, we really have the capacity to build holistic and meaningful relationships for those other external clients. But if we don't have that internally functioning right, it sometimes becomes very siloed and we don't operate with the best interest of the university and our clients, industry, and government agencies in mind. And so really beginning to develop those relationships internally, understanding the goals and perspectives of our peers in those other areas. And then how do we both formally and informally communicate with them? Do we have routine and regular communication? Do we meet with any degree of regularity? And then how can we leverage our connections and then facilitate collaboration? I think when we're doing all of those things well, the opportunity for prosperity and growth in our communities becomes magnified. And so a lot of the work that we do at NACRO, a lot of the work that we do at the University of Florida really is at the intersection of all of those things. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation and our discussion today because one, I'm really excited to be on a panel with these other wonderful leaders in the field. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to learn collectively from one another in terms of how we do the work that we do. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Kim. All right, so now we'll be joined by all of our panelists. Great. Let me serve up a couple of questions that I've already received in the Q&A here. We have Keisha Demps from NC State University is interested in the trends that you're seeing in regards to industry collaborations now that we're 6 months into the pandemic, right? I mean, you know, we've seen different, and so I'm interested in the perspective of you three experts from the place that you sit right now. Who wants to go first?
I can start with that.
Thanks.
We're seeing a lot of industry interest in areas where they haven't been in the past. In particular, being in Florida, I get a lot of inquiries lately about fire disaster and fire prevention, helping with that. Obviously, COVID research is really big for us right now. We're currently working on about 4 clinical trials in that space. And so we have a lot of interest in that area. We just initiated the Healthy Davis Together project, which our office oversaw, and that is basically how does a city with a university open up safely and collaboratively. So it's a combination of engagement between the university, the city, the school district, the local school district. And so we're getting a lot of interesting inquiries about that. And same is true on the foundation side. We see a lot of interest in pivoting into space where they're seeing kind of interest with not just in COVID and areas, you know, initiatives in this space, but things around the country as well.
Thanks, Amy. Kim?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, within the College of Engineering specifically, I think we've had a little bit of the COVID response and ventilator redevelopment. How can we do that in a lower cost and more efficient manner? So there's been a lot of interest in those areas. And then more on kind of going to the earlier part of this discussion today around talent management. I think a lot of what we heard from our colleagues at NACE and Maryland and at Handshake, we're feeling it here and in the college as well. So there's been a real transition away from maybe traditional approaches to recruiting. And so we're getting creative with some of the things that we've done to connect students with various organizations and what does that look like. And I think that those things are going to continue, and the tension between wanting to still have some type of a presence but not being quite sure how much they can recruit in some industries, that's something that's very real, and we've definitely felt that. But we've also seen a huge uptick in interest in hiring in certain fields where clearly it makes a lot of sense. You know, it's that software engineering side of things, anything in the telecom space. And so I think that those trends that were highlighted by the folks that are more in that career services space, we're feeling it as well on our end.
And Jill, you've already told you're further upstream, right? I mean, you're not in a responsive type of role within your institution. So how is the pandemic changing how you are thinking about research development?
So one of the things about research development is that often we can mobilize quickly. We're often a nimble unit so that we can move to address fast challenges like this. So our COVID response in research development was to track funding opportunities. That was a big one. We had developed with our Office of Research a COVID portal just for research because, and I was not involved with all the efforts to ramp down or shut down research and then ramp it back up slowly with the CDC guidelines in place. But we were helping our researchers, making sure that researchers who were doing COVID-related research could continue their work and that we were connecting them with resources and funding opportunities. So we had a whole website that was dedicated just to COVID-related funding. And then we started also promoting or making visible the work that was happening around COVID on campus. So we had a separate site that listed COVID-related projects to try and increase collaboration around these issues. And we actually started putting out a weekly newsletter too that would communicate all the COVID-related research news, funding opportunities. You know, and the industry side, we saw a lot of like Amazon Web Services and cloud computing credits and things like that. So the corporations were getting involved that way, and either providing funding opportunities, or like Kim said, ventilator, how do we produce mass ventilators, things like that, technology, and a lot of digital data sharing type things as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm interested to learn from the panel, how do you go about seeking and recruiting new industry partners? Maybe they're coming to you, but talk a little bit about your individual institution's approach to recruitment.
Well, I'm happy to.
Go ahead, Kim. Yeah.
I think that more often than not, like right now, the university, much like many universities, is heavily focused in the area of artificial intelligence and AI. And we recently received a fairly significant investment from NVIDIA of a beautiful new supercomputer that we're very excited about. But so as we think about where we're headed and where we want to forge additional relationships, a lot of it has to do with where we think we're going to have some unique capabilities. So as we look at and prioritize relationships that maybe we have, but maybe haven't been as fully fleshed out, or may have been, I hate to say one-dimensional, but maybe focused on just one attribute of being engaged with the academic institution, we're taking a look at those types of companies and saying, what else can we do beyond maybe sourcing talent to you, or beyond just being engaged in sponsored research activity, but how do we begin to do more than one of those domains? How do we operate or create a more holistic approach to the work that we're doing? So it's not so much about finding new partners, so much as making sure the partners that we have right now, that we've fully fleshed out where there are opportunities to us being more engaged with them in multiple ways. And the AI piece of things has certainly altered some of the discussions that we've had, because in the past we maybe didn't have some of the capacity that we do now. Mm-hmm. And so it's provided a real opportunity for us to engage in conversations about how we might leverage access to infrastructure with companies so that we can work on bigger, bolder research agendas, right? And so those kinds of things are certainly helping to spur some of that dialogue and that conversation. And honestly, I think that for some of the institutions that NACRO, for example, represents, they don't have a lack of necessarily connections to industry, but it's for those schools that are in more rural locations, who maybe don't have highly extensive research portfolios. How do they establish those relationships? I think it's a very different thing, and that's actually something that I'd be interested in hearing how some of my colleagues handle those types of things, though I don't know that UC Davis and Michigan are in that same position. I think they, much like Florida, all of us being relatively large flagship public institutions, I think in a lot of ways we're very fortunate in that we oftentimes are sought out, but I think that that is a very real challenge for a number of different academic institutions. How do you begin to forge those relationships? So I don't know that I'm the best at answering that from a position outside of a large R1, but those are some of the things that we're doing to expand existing relationships and reimagine ones that maybe have been a little bit not fully developed.
So along that idea that it's easier to expand upon an existing partner than to, that your resources are better spent expanding upon a company that already knows that you're great than trying to get a new one. Amy, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Kim said. For us, it's really looking at expanding relationships. I mean, we see successful partnerships as having multiple people within the university talking to multiple people within the company. And so they're not single focused on certain areas. And so what my team tries to do is to expand those relationships. Take Mars, for example, is one of our biggest partners. They have, obviously the confectionery side, which we're very involved in agriculture, but they also have a vet side. And so we try to figure out how we're going to move those relationships to different parts of campus. When I was at Ford, we were very involved in that as well. We had certain departments that were very focused in areas that had relationships with certain universities. But then we had other areas in mobility and AV, for example, that were at different universities. So that's really what we try to focus on. So it's a combination of reactionary and proactive approach. Because we're out in this area close to the Bay, we also work very closely with a lot of startups. And so we focus on those new industries where they're aligned closely to the expertise at UC Davis. We're very involved in the wine and coffee industry, so we're really close with everybody in Napa, which is really wonderful. But in terms of telehealth and ag tech, which are really new and evolving industries, we target startups where we know that there's going to be active engagement on campus, and then helping them in particular areas like talent, or even helping them with student projects. In some cases, it's a small team of brilliant experts, but they don't know anything about marketing, for example. So we connect them with expertise who can help them develop a marketing plan. So it's really, and Kim, and I'm sure Jill can add to this, but it's really about understanding what the needs are of our corporate partners and then figuring out where to connect them on campus.
And can I tack onto that answer, Amy? Can you give us the perspective of your time at Ford and how Ford was choosing their schools that they wanted to work with, or how you were doing that?
Sure. So we had a pretty small team. There was about 12 to 14. They're still there. Talked to them quite a bit. And we worked overall with about 120 universities. We had kind of a pyramid structure where we had 4 strategic partnerships. And then we had other, and those were universities that had dedicated funding in the research space and some philanthropy as well. And then we had other universities that were, again, more targeted or focused based on, where there was alignment with the company. And we had a whole list of criteria of kind of who bubbled to the top in terms of where we recruited from. Again, the expertise. But I will tell you that a lot of the areas in which we looked at were easy to work with, right? So I had several in my portfolio. Again, having a global lead, I didn't have time to talk to 10 people at the university or to figure out who to go to. I was lucky enough that I covered University of Michigan. I worked there, was an alum there, so am an alum from there. So it was easy for me to kind of identify who to talk to, but I worked very closely with the Business Engagement Center, and they did a lot of that work for me. So I could throw out the questions of who are the experts in this space, or how can we help improve talent in recruitment in this particular area? And so they did a lot of the work for us. And I think that's really what the value of having a model like many universities have turned to now, that NACRO really supports, because I think it helps companies understand the universities that they work with. Every day I learn something new about a new resource or a new way to partner with the university. And what surprised me most going to Ford, I do not have an engineering background, yet I was a lead in engineering research. And I had many times where I would sit in a room and I could see people saying, how did she get in here? What is she doing? But as they talked about things like, we need to do surveys, we need this expertise, I was always the one raising my hand saying, you can partner with the university to do that. And in many cases, it would be cheaper than going through a supplier. So part of that was really educating the engineers that I worked with on how they could engage with the university.
Great, thank you. I wonder if you three can talk about the metrics that you are using when you're measuring corporate engagement at your individual universities. And so I don't want to, color the response at all. I'm interested in those things that you're measuring every day that are the most important to your individual offices.
I can start with that, just with my team. So obviously, our goal is to bring investment into the university. So we look at that both from a philanthropic side and from research. But I have new metrics for my team, which is what we implemented when I got there. And a lot of it has to do with the internal engagement that we do as well, in terms of making sure that we're opening up lines of communication, we're coordinating offices, we're sharing information. So I also measure faculty interactions with my team. I look at not just the end result of the investment that maybe that comes in, but the steps that it took to get you there. And I think that's extremely important. For us, it's about building trust in the relationship. And so I say this to my team often, There are a lot of times where we take the ball all the way to, just before we get to the end zone, and then we hand it over to somebody else. And that really is what our model is about. That we're there to make sure that the relationship is being moved along. So I have some people on my team that will just start with early, smaller sponsorships, 10,000 to maybe 50,000. And so they get credit all the way to multi-million-dollar partnerships.
Jill, I didn't know if you wanted to respond. I'm in a really weird position at UF. So I don't know if Jill, you want to respond. I'm in a very weird place in terms of metrics, but.
I think the slides are going to be shared. So I would point people to the annual report that our tech transfer office just put out, because all of the metrics are in there. I don't know how they measure engagement, and the work that individual people within the office are doing to engage with partners, but it does have all the metrics around number of patents, number of startups, industry funding that's come in, so all the pretty obvious stuff.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm actually helping to co-host a NACRO presentation on metrics that matter for corporate relations officers in November. And I'm in this really strange position because in my current role at the University of Florida, I'm no longer affiliated with our foundation. And so I no longer have these fundraising goals that are certainly associated with some of my peers in like business school, ag and med, and all the other areas. So certainly on the foundation side, they definitely keep track of some of the things you expect them to track. How much corporate philanthropy has come in, how much corporate sponsored research has come in, and things of that nature. I think that those are kind of obvious things. But I think that Amy is really getting at where I get evaluated. When my boss evaluates my relative performance and the work that I do with industry, he's looking at how did we help meet the needs of whomever that industry partner was. Did we help get them the answer that they needed, or did we leave them out to dry? Like, those are the kinds of things that are evaluated and considered when we're looking at progress within the College of Engineering here. I manage 2 teams in remote locations, and when we look at what industry engagement looks like, it's certainly looking at some of the dollars and cents, but candidly, that's not where I put my emphasis. My emphasis is on, were we able to help them connect with our Career Connection Center? Were we able to help them hire the students or increase the number of interns that are being provided to that particular region across the state of Florida? Our extension network does more than just industry outreach. We do a fair amount of K-12 outreach and other types of things that are certainly part of the metrics. All because ultimately our extension network is about economic development and prosperity in the state of Florida. And you can't look at economic development and only look at what the industry investment is. You need to be thinking about the talent pipeline that's being put together that's going to be able to serve the needs of the state, not just today, but in the future. And so what are we doing to prepare our K-12 environment? What are we doing to support our state colleges that are educating candidly the masses of Floridians? And how do we help support and build up them and their capability to educate the workforce of tomorrow? And then how do we upskill the existing workforce or the displaced workforce that we have here in the state of Florida? Hospitality is kind of a big deal. When Disney World shuts down for a large number of months, we need to start thinking creatively and differently about how we provide resources that are going to uplift those entire segments of our population that have been displaced and are now trying to get reskilled to go back into the workforce. So a lot of our performance metrics are based on what are the unique set of circumstances that are needed in order for our state to thrive economically. So it's not a normal set of metrics, but it's also really hard to pin down.
It's not normal, but Kim, I appreciate the you're sharing that perspective with us, because it's a reminder for everybody to keep the the long game in mind, that we're all here in various ways, and we're all at state universities to serve to the betterment of our state and its residents. And so thanks for giving us that good reminder. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So one of our questions here is whether any of our panelists are engaged in exploring or forming new forms of engagement with partners? Or is there a reliance on the existing structure and arrangements? And I'm thinking that this person probably means, you know, sponsored research or gift dollars, you know, kind of those normal buckets that we think of. And how open are your institutions to thinking about those new models of engagement?
So I'm really fortunate to be here at UC Davis. Our chancellor, Gary May, who came from Georgia Tech, this was his initiative when we brought it here. So there's a constant discussion about other ways that we could expand engagement with our external partners. One in particular that's pertinent to this conversation has to do with Aggie Square. We're finding a lot of companies who are interested in forming closer partnerships with other companies and see Aggie Square as an avenue to do that. Also understanding the startup space and the faculties that we have starting new businesses, how can they become engaged with that? How can they look at early stage technology? So that is a huge area that's growing. I have lots of companies wanting to look at the technology for licensing and commercialization, which we have a whole team that works with that. And so we meet regularly, all the leads of all of those offices. We talk often. We're about ready to launch a new CRM between our teams to really discuss all of the potential for engagement with our companies and foundations. In particular, with companies, we have a lot of interest in funding or looking at and partnering in initiatives that are maybe considered personal or even political. I think in some areas around COVID or some of the initiatives that seem to be a little bit more controversial, they rely on us to try to pull partners in together to develop solutions. So that's been kind of an evolving area that's been interesting to be involved with.
I'd like to contribute. I don't know if it answers this question. It kind of relates to an earlier question. One of the conversations I've had recently with our business engagement team is about how to make it easy for potential partners, corporate or industry partners to find our faculty. We have, 7,000 faculty at the University of Michigan, and it's not, if you come to us, it can be very intimidating about how do you find what I'm looking for, who's working on what, who would I like to partner with. And, that's something that a research development or Office of Research team can work on or help with. And so we're looking into possible solutions like faculty profile, standard faculty profile system, right, for the whole campus, which has its own challenges when you're talking about 7,000 faculty in 19 schools and colleges. But it would be, we're looking at options like that to help to make it easier for people to find potential collaborators here.
And I would add on to what Jill was saying as well. When I was at Ford, working closely with the University of Michigan, as they were hiring new people, they would contact us. Sometimes we would write letters of support. We would even discuss certain opportunities to offer, research funding to kind of sweeten the pot. Because for us, if they went to, Carnegie Mellon, for example, they worked with GM. So we wanted them at our strategic partnership schools. And so we also do that at UC Davis when we're looking at recruitment of faculty. So what Jill mentioned is I think going to be a really growing, even bigger growing trend. And it's very important to establishing your expertise in the university.
I wanted to mention as well, the University of Michigan does not have a research park. I was speaking with our AVP earlier today, Nick Wigington, who said he was engaged with this group a couple of years ago because we were exploring building a research park or a tech park or something like that. And he wanted me to share the link for the Detroit Center for Innovation, which is what we ended up doing instead of a research park for now. So I'm going to put that in the chat. Which is a really cool initiative that we're really excited about.
Thanks, Jill, and tell Nick we said hi.
Well,
I still follow him on Twitter, so I see what he's doing. Kim, I wonder if you might be able to tack on to this, because one of our participants has highlighted the fact that community colleges are also a really important part of these collaborations. So I wonder if you touch that in your work, and if you might be able to pull out some of those best practices from University of Florida.
Yeah, so I do actually manage our state college partnerships for the College of Engineering. And so we have extension offices in Sarasota and then just outside the gates to Eglin. And over the course of the next 5 to 7 years, we anticipate rolling out additional extension offices. And when we do that, we try to work very closely with the state colleges in the state of Florida. Here in Florida, there is an understood articulation agreement between the 28 state university, or between the 12 state university schools and our 28 state colleges, so that if you complete your 2 years there, you automatically are eligible for admission to one of the state university schools. It is program specific though, so if there's multiple engineering schools, it doesn't mean that you're getting into the University of Florida engineering school. You could go to any of the other engineering schools in the state. So what we did is when we go into those communities, we are forging new MOUs and understandings with those state colleges so that we have a direct pathway into the UF College of Engineering. Our students are doing their first 2 years of critical tracking in that community college or that state college, and then they matriculate up as soon as they complete their critical tracking courses to the University of Florida. It allows some of the students who maybe have a desire to stay closer to home or maybe place bound, at least initially, to have kind of the advantage of small class size, lower cost of attendance, and things of that nature. The other part of what that has done is allowed us to explore the feasibility of offering them the opportunity to participate, in particular in this new COVID world that we're in. In the past, we would offer them opportunities to come to campus and experience like long weekends or design days where they would come up and do work in our design labs and things like that. But now we're actually bringing some of our industry panelists and panel discussions to the state college system. So in just a week from now, we're actually doing an extensive panel on the future of work that involves not just some of our faculty that are moderating that discussion, but some of our industry partners are speaking to how this technology is impacting the work that they do. And part of the reason that we're doing that is we really want all of that cadre of students from the state colleges to be excited about the future of work and come to the University of Florida, and when they matriculate in, consider the feasibility of adding on an AI undergraduate certificate, right? So we have, we're in the process of getting it through Faculty Senate and all of that process, but working with state colleges so that those students come in ready and interested in pursuing an undergrad cert in applied AI. So those are the kinds of things that we're beginning to do more and more of. We already collaborate on a number of curricular types of things. We have a common course code system for the entire state college system and the university system. And so that makes it very seamless. As we've been launching several new courses, we've been working very closely with Miami-Dade College and some of the others to talk about how might they roll those out in their respective communities. We also are working with them as well as the state agency and job workforce boards to explore how can we do upskilling and credentialing. And so that's a non-traditional type of thing that we're beginning to get into the space of. We launched earlier this year our micro-credential process. So it's short courses that can be stacked for a micro-credential that then stacked to a full credential. And we're looking to align those with industry-based credentials that are recognized, needed, and wanted. And then how can we deploy that through our state college partners and the workforce boards in those localized communities. But we're in the process of building out infrastructure and process to be able to execute at scale on a number of those different initiatives.
Thank you. So I think we have time maybe for one last question, and I just think that this is maybe a good way to wrap us up and bring it to a close here. So I'm interested from our three panelists if you have one or two best practices that if you were to share with this group, and of course their network beyond that they might talk with, what are the one or two skills or best practices that you would like for them to develop? And I'm going to call upon Amy first, just because you're right there on my screen.
So do you mean as an office as a whole or more as an individual?
Within your office, but I mean, I don't want to cap that, but specific to the work that you're doing within your university.
So I think, best practices, like I said earlier, make it easier for your partners to work with you, right? I mean, I often call our team air traffic controllers. We're really a concierge. We are sometimes, getting in, there to help. So I think, making sure that you're easy to work with and that you are able to find the win-win on both sides of the relationship. So I actually, when I was interviewing with UC Davis, I had met with a team that actually visited me when I was at Ford. And after the interview, it was really funny. One of them pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I just wanted to ask you, why didn't it work when we came to visit you?" And I said, "Because you never asked me about what we needed. You walked in and you just gave me a litany of things that you needed, money that you wanted, and then it all sounded really great, but I couldn't figure out a way to make it to a tie to Ford. So when you walked out the door, I just kind of put it on a list." So I encourage my team, when you're talking with your corporate partners, make sure that you're asking what their needs are. And if you can't we're relationship managers. And it's the same thing as when you're dating somebody. You got to act like you're interested in what they're interested in as well.
So customer focused.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Kim, a last word for our group.
I think that kind of to Amy's point, if she's speaking about the office, I would say I'm going to give advice from more of an individual perspective, because I think sometimes it's easy for us all to get focused on what our offices are doing. So to complement that, I'll say that the other part of it is assume the best intentions among all your peers that you work with. Assume that they are grounded and doing the work that they do from the same good place that you are grounded and do the work that you do. We're all here because we want to serve our institutions. We want to serve our states, since we're all representing public and grant institutions. We're all here because we have that sense of responsibility to support our institution. And so assume that people's intentions are equally as good. And if you don't understand why they're behaving the way they do, I think it's important to ask why did we operate in that way? And then the more important thing is, what can I do? How can I address my interaction with your office in a way that's going to yield a result that's positive, right? So instead of asking, "Gosh darn it, why'd you do it that way?" ask yourself, what could we have done differently to have made this a more amicable solution? And so I think just kind of going at it from a place of positivity is something that we all should be mindful of.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jill, a parting
Those are
thought here
really-
for our group.
Those are two really good ones. And I love that Amy referred to herself as a concierge, because I tell our faculty to think of us as research concierge on our team. I will speak to it from a faculty support perspective. Don't assume the faculty members know. Don't assume they know what their sponsor or their corporate partner is looking for. Don't assume they know what compliance hoops they need to jump through. Don't assume they know how to submit the applications, right? So we're there to sort of walk them through, help them navigate, and make sure they've reached out to program officers, all of that stuff. And I think that's the best practice when it comes to best support for our clients, which are the faculty.
Those are great. Stay customer focused, assume everybody's coming from a place of positivity, and don't assume that they know what you think they know. That's great. I appreciate that very much, ladies. Thank you for your time today. And so I think now I'm going to be handing it back to Brian. Of course, we'll remind you, if you liked this conversation, cue into the Association of University Research Parks International Conference, virtually, of course, which is November 2nd through 6th. And you'll see some of these topics discussed in greater detail. And I'm going to turn it now back to you, Brian.
Well, thanks, Leah, and members of the panel. And I want to thank members of the first panel, Sean, Kelly, Christine, Jill, Amy, and Kim for this panel. I also want to thank the sponsors, including these are our corporate sponsors at AURP. And as Leah mentioned, We have our international conference November 2nd to the 6th, 2020. We're going to have sessions on enhancing university corporate relations. So we have UIDP, University Industry Demonstration Project, speaking. We have a session on the Bayh-Dole Act. We have a session with Steve Case. We talked a little bit about entrepreneurship, and he, of course, is famous for the Rise of the Rest, trying to bring venture capital to the rest of the country. And here's the slide for our virtual conference, November 2nd to the 6th. And a special note, if you sign up for this conference by the close of business Friday, you'll be eligible for a $250 Amazon card raffle. So please consider signing up. And again, we also want to thank Ripen for their work, and everyone, since we're right at 4 o'clock, we're going to close this. Thank you for attending, and hope to see you either virtually at AURP or somewhere else. Thank you, and if you want, you can stay on the chat because some of us will stay on, and we greatly appreciate all of your attending. See you. Have a great weekend.